Hello, I'm Florian. I'm a partner, co-founder at Shau. I'm originally German, educated in the Netherlands, did the master degree at the Berlach Institute, then worked at UN Studio for a while, did a PhD, first TU Delft, then TU Eindhoven. And yeah, together with Eleena, we have Shau since 2009. And yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, I'm Eleena Suryawinata. I'm Indonesian. I had my bachelor's degree in Indonesia, then I went for a master's degree at the Berlach Institute in Rotterdam. And there I stayed for around 12 years, met Florian, and also worked for 3 Dutch firms. That was OMA, MVRDV, and West 8. And later on, when Florian and I were working at TU Delft and Florian later at TU Eindhoven, we established Shau in 2008. So in Rotterdam, we started, and later on, we grew into Indonesia after completing curatorial work for the International Architecture Biennale Rotterdam. And yeah, we connected somehow with our network in Indonesia and got some projects on. So we established an office in 2012 in Jakarta, and then later 2015 in Bandung.
And I forgot to mention, I'm currently associate professor in practice at the National University of Singapore. And the projects we want to talk about today is microlibrary Warakayu and Alun-Alun Cicendo. And this is insofar interesting because it ties into the question of making, manufacturing, and the participation. And these are completely 2 different models, where one Cicendo is more like what you described or talked earlier about the tukang, versus Warakayu is more of an industrialized process and assembly in form of engineered timber. And yeah, it's completely 2 different games and also 2 different level of control.
These 2 projects show the different approaches that we do, how to start a project. And the microlibrary Warakayu is part of the microlibrary series, which we initiated ourselves. So there we find the stakeholders, the funder, the local government, the community to go with it. While public space commissions that came from government. So in this case, the Bandung local government, which was then headed by Mayor Ridwan Kamil, who is an architect himself. So these are like 2 different models that we have in our practice. Sometimes we initiate things and find ourselves the everything else, or we still get commissions as well. And yeah, so that's how we came to start the projects.
Yeah, and also a very important part of this is the level of control you can exert on the project, because the microlibraries, they're small, very often CSR funded, so then we have very big control over it. We can select a contractor and we can work together, and we're as architect responsible. In the classical sense, what a German architect, for instance, would do. You know, you go from phase 0 to phase 8. REBA systems probably similar in a way, you know, that you are responsible for the costing, the details, and the execution and the site supervision, right? Whereas the other one is we are only responsible with Cicendo for the city. We are only responsible until DED, definite design, and that means the whole tendering process is in the hand of the city, and then the choosing of the contractor and their tukangs is completely not up to us. And that means, like, if we're in such a project, we have to accept that we have to let go control and have to live with certain outcomes which we cannot change.
That is correct. So the microlibraries, this initiative, we also designed for our office to experiment. So therefore, whenever we have some issues we would like to put forward, such as the issue of waste, we could propose then the ice cream buckets for the first microlibrary. And it also came to us that the microlibrary Warakayu should be in wood, because a wood manufacturer came to us and wants to make an exemplary certified wood building out of it. And then we went for that as well. As for the commission projects with public tendered contractors, we still can propose materials, but the materials that we pick should be easy then to construct. And as Florian mentioned, because we wouldn't have control over the detail, how it's going to be constructed.
So part of the design process actually includes the projection from our side, what we think a contractor would be able to do. Meaning, if we, like in Warakkayu, we were working together with the research and development team of Kayu Lapis Indonesia, and we could sort of ping pong back and forth. You know, what are the ideas, what are the technical ideas? So we went there and we looked at the material available, all the timber products they have, and then we started from that sort of bottom-up design process. Sort of, okay, you can cut this way. This joinery is possible, and then we started to propose things. And then, for instance, the Zollinger facade, which is sort of this reciprocal system where one board holds two boards via a set of bolts going through. And so this is not such an easy task, especially the corners, because you know there's a miter joints, and then you have to bring them three-dimensionally together around the corner. So you need a partner who's able to do this and has the machinery and the technical knowledge. Whereas with alun-alun Chicendo, so we, or also alun-alun Kejaksan in Cirebon, Chicendo is made from steel, and Kejaksan is made from bricks, from local bricks. So we need to employ sort of a resilient way of design that we are sure they can make it, you know. So Chicendo is a steel park because at the site around there are a lot of vendors selling spare parts and steel parts, and what we know, a contractor very often comes there and has a smaller crew, right? But then they hire local people, and this comes into this participatory aspect. So we choose steel because we know there are people who have some expertise about steel in the neighborhood, and then they could be hired and work there and sort of participating, making this. And the same we did that with Kejaksan, with a brick, because brick is a very sort of common use material, and you know, so this is part of this design strategy in a way to take the labor already, or people who are going to make it, into consideration.
We are lucky that in Microlibrary Warakkayu, we get such collaborators who are willing to do the experiment together with us, because we could easily just find people who do not want to be fussed and just want to get things done quickly. But in Kayu Lapis, Indonesia, that's not the case. So we were discussing the details together, made the mock-up one-to-one mock-up. Florian went to the factory there and discussed and before we designed the building, Microlibrary Warakkayu, we asked them what kind of materials and what kind of joints they could do. So in a way also to browse the library of what they're used to do and to tap on that expertise when we're designing the building. So not coming from scratch and then asking them to do what they're not used to do.
Yeah, I mean, this was also part of one of your questions, right? If we sort of perceive the design beforehand and then we think about how to materialize it, or if we do this the other way around. And with Warakkayu, it was for sure a bottom-up design process, thinking from out the materials they have available and the construction technology which they have available, and then from understanding what they can do, then push the boundary towards innovation, or innovate and rethink certain things and think out of the box. But it's always like putting yourself in the sort of the realm of the possible and then work from that side, rather than putting yourself outside this realm of the possible and then come up with some solution which is completely unmakeable or unthinkable. And this is like how we want to work. And yeah, the same goes also with alun-alun Chicendo, like I said, like with the steel and the people in the neighborhood having expertise about steel. So we thought about, okay, let's work with steel. This case, we wanted to have Cortain steel, but but Cortain steel is not a affordable brand in Indonesia. So basically the manufacturer just got the usual steel plates, and then we started to experiment with spraying different degrees of acids to corrode it, right? And how many, so there was an experimentation in terms of how many layers of acid is to be sprayed to get the right effect and get the right sort of corrosive protective layer. And so, yeah, I mean, they were also, interestingly, also wanted to experiment on that level, for instance.
Yeah, the Alun-Alun Cicendo project, that was a challenging project for us because it was our first large public space design commission. And therefore, it was such a process with the government as well, having to change back and forth the design to fit the data, which was not there in the beginning. It's always the case for most government projects in Indonesia that the data needs to be collected one by one. And at the end, it was standard. The contractor team only had 3-4 months to finish everything. And they found out that there was like more pile of garbage than they realized. So they had to dig out a lot and have to do a lot with the leveling and the grounding. And that was some challenges. So we had to adapt our design towards that as well. So it was really a very tight period of time for the tendered contractor. It was always raining because somehow all government projects are always done in the months of the rain. And it has to be finished by December 31st. So it was really challenging, and therefore all the details, not all of them could be realized by the contractor. But even so, we think that it turned out to be acceptable and all right. Like probably 85% of the design were properly in place. And we're happy to see now that there are trees growing, and the kids are still using the public space and also clean them regularly. So we're quite happy with that project.
Yeah, this is one of the questions as well. And how much did the project change during the design process? And both changed, Barakayo as well as Cicendo, and Cicendo a lot more. Because as Daliana already mentioned, there was a difference in height, how we defined the 0 point and how they defined the 0 point. In the end, they put part of this pavilion, then we have this zigzagging pavilion, where you have this one side, the stairs up, and the other side, you have the seating stairs. But they put it on different height levels, and all of a sudden, our steps became much higher because they sort of worked from the drawings from a starting point, which is completely different, and tried to apply the drawings, and it became a pure interpretation of what we have drawn. I mean, it somehow looks similar, but on the way they just sort of adjusted and adopted and made steps higher, and some of them are irregular and things like this. But we cannot help it. It's the outcome, and still it's like Dana said, it's good enough, right? And there's a little bit the issue of the communication as well. This is again comes the culture back, because they don't want to come and say like, hey, we did a mistake, right? Or they try to cover it up, or it would go against their honor and stuff like this. And then if you don't have this trust because you never worked together, so they never tell you. And then you come and do the site visit and see like, what's going on here? What did you do here? And then they never tell you that there was unevenness in the terrain for building it. So you have to live with the result, and you cannot change it. And this is a little bit, for me, sometimes a bit frustrating. With Barakayo, we also had to make some changes and alterations, but they were clearly communicated, and there was a clear reason. And it's not just like, okay, that's the result, now live with it. So, completely different things. So in a way, we had to add some struts because, the structural calculation was done from a good structural engineer, but not so much of an expertise in timber engineering, because this timber engineering is not that present in Indonesia, or not at all. So they're maybe starting right now. So we needed to add some struts to make it simply stiffer, right? And then the whole building was almost done. But then we started to communicate, and it turned out nice. So if you have not designed it and have not drawn the details, you would not even realize that there are some changes on that level. So I would say, yeah, this is changes for the better. The other one is more changes for the, yeah, could have been better, but can't help it.
Yeah, well, in Indonesia, I think Shau is regarded as more communicative architects than others. So we are always trying to ask questions first, trying to take the initiative to communicate first. So yeah, in the Warakayu project, it goes two ways, the communication. And in some governmental project, it is more us asking them, and every week visiting the site though. But there are still sometimes yeah, things that cannot be communicated. So we had to find out ourselves and figure out how to talk about this to the builder or to the mandor, we call it, like someone who's dealing with the tukang.
And we were not even hired nor paid for site supervision, nor did we have a mandate. So we just went there anyway and tried to bother them.
That's correct, because when you are a designer, an architect designer for a government project, it is not always or less likely to be also the supervisor. And the supervisor has a different role in terms of checking the budget and volume and so on. So it was not we were not contracted as the supervisor of that project, as Florian mentioned.
Of course, there are some theories behind that cultures and communication evolve differently, simply due to the fact of having seasons or having a rainy season and dry season versus having like 4 seasons, and structuring agriculture and planning thus therefore differently. However, I see this as highly difficult to say that the way how I personally was growing up in terms of design and is superior. And it's a super difficult question because in Singapore we have the British colonial heritage and legacy, and reading about that right now, how it was from army and this sort of utility buildings, how this sort of ended up in a building culture and a building code. And the same way goes for the Dutch, when they have built parts of Batavia back then, Jakarta, and also ITB in Institute Technology in Bandung, which is sort of based on TU Delft, actually. The people from back then, TU Delft, built this, and they used the halls are quite fascinating. These timber halls, the sort of laminated timber, but sort of bound together with steel ribs and sort of emulating a traditional roof with a very innovative, back then, very innovative structure. And yeah, it has always this sort of taste of colonialism if you say, okay, I know better and you need to do it that way. It's sort of this top-down, I educate you thing. So one has to be really careful with this one, to also to understand that even unwillingly or unknowingly, you have this bias built into yourself. And yeah, at the beginning, I personally was sometimes unhappy of how details were executed and stuff like this. And this is sort of a personal learning process that you need to understand that not your way is necessarily the right way. I don't know how you see this.
Yes, I think you pose a very interesting question, and the answer is probably a combination of both at the end, where I value very much, since I was educated in the Netherlands architecturally, as well as my working experience are mostly from the Netherlands. I really like the directness, the systematic way of doing things, to leave less rooms for errors. To keep things more controlled, and the budget and the timeline. That is beautiful from an Indonesian point of view, where I mean it's chaos against order. So, but on the other hand, having seen the processes and how traditionally people build things in Indonesia, like the builder, the community working together, there must be room for that as well somewhere. So it seems to be for still having the timeline, the budget, the planning as as in the West, but leave rooms for some of these possibilities for innovation. That could be great.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's also the beauty of operating in Indonesia, because on the other hand, you have extreme freedom, right? There is a building code, and you have to obey the building code, and that's out of question. But I mean, since it's always 30 degrees, and there's dry season and rainy season, I don't have to care about insulation, right? So the only thing we need to do is having good cross ventilation, have shadow overhang and rain protection, and we can do tropical architecture, and we can do this without any aircon if we have all the passive climatic design strategies, right? Mm-hmm. But that makes this building so much more simple, because you can just work with one layer, right? And in Europe, you need this layer and that layer and insulation, and then it needs to be airtight and whatever. So it becomes a technical exercise for the sake of energy preservation and for the sake of fulfilling the building code, right? And then there's often very little room for actually design and architectural work and thinking what the building should do, because you're so obsessed with all the technical aspects. And this is the beauty in Indonesia also, that architects till now are still not really liable, right? So in Germany, you do one drawing. That's the reason we become so obsessed, because they can sue you like crazy if something is wrong, right? So if it's not provable, that's the wrongdoing of the contractor, you automatically as architect, you're liable, right? And in Indonesia, this all falls away, and this is so beautiful in a way. Not that we would do architecture, how to say, in a sloppy way, but simply you can experiment if you are given the freedom to experiment, right? So we are responsible, but still we have this enormous freedom.
But having said that, you mentioned the tropical climate is forgiving in a way, except for the rain.
Yeah.
The rain is something to take care about. But indeed, what Florian mentioned about in Europe, the architecture as an engineering product is probably true. And well, yes, that must have something to do with the climate and the planning culture as well.
I mean, in Europe, if you have a draft, it's bad, because then it's in winter, there's this like little here, and it's sort of somehow you feel cold, but it's, even if it's warm, you feel cold through this draft. And in a tropical climate, everything is about the draft. What you don't like in Europe, the draft, you want to have the draft in. So everything should be just blowing through. It's very nice, like as airy and as light as possible, and so which leads to light constructions as well, and in a way that automatically makes buildings more sustainable, because you maybe use less materials, and so it's a nice place to operate, I must say.
The pandemic, we use definitely less physical models, and that's a pity. We try when it's possible, when the process allows, to try first with foam models, volumetric studies, like 20 of them on the table, and then pick some and then detail it with a different kind of model. That's not always the case for every project. And definitely the 3D softwares, they're so easy to visualize, and it's very practical to go to the client as well to show the options rather than the physical model. But in general, we love physical models. We do 3D printing ourselves sometimes. We still have the blue foam cutter from the Netherlands, which we brought, and we really want our office to do more of these, actually.
So I have my own take on this sketching thing. I like sketches, and when I was a student, I did a lot. I had these endless sketchbooks, and I collected them and stuff like this, and they had to look nice. And when I came to the Netherlands, I realized this is not sketching, this is sort of more like rendering, right? And when I look on Instagram, I see so many these sort of nice sketches and renderings, but which are only portraying a form, and which are only sort of a representation of what you anyway have thought in your head. And they completely do not acknowledge that sketching should be a creative process where you find something, where you discover something, where you develop something, right? So I'm very critical about these sketches, and I had a very big discussion with Kevin Lau a while ago about sketching, because he says like architects need to sketch and whatever, and I said, you know, architects need to 3D model, you know, and we're sort of like completely opposing. So yes, I'm sketching, but this is more like a process sketch, something which does not try to be pretty deliberately, you know, like a doctor's medicine handwriting, like, you know, just sort of somebody can interpret something. Other sketches are more detailed when it's about detailing, right? But not about architectural concept. And yes, model making would love to do more, but somehow our people are sometimes a little bit hesitant, or they don't want to do it. So yes, we work a lot with 3D, and what I recently find an enormous helpful tool, at least for communication, is real-time rendering software. So we use Twinmotion in the office, and that's so amazing. If you just throw it in, and then you have like your people and your cars and your plants, especially the plants, that's amazing. You know, you use a brush and then you paint grass and bushes and trees, and you know, you used to do like hours of Photoshop work, and now you have this in real time and you can walk around, and it helps tremendously with a client that, you know, they're not trained as architects, they don't know necessarily how to read plans and sections that well, and then being able to judge it. But then when they see and feel the room, it's really, and you can walk through and can show them, oh, look here or there or there, or you know, are you sure you want to have it that way? You know, do you really think now this is a good design decision, what you just asked us a week ago, and we can prove it that it's not very good, and then they look at it and maybe you're right, you know, maybe it's not a good thing to do. So yes, yeah, a lot of 3D modeling. Also climatic analysis and things like this is interesting, you know, to really be able to prove to the client, if you do a facade that way or you do a roof overhang that way, that passive heat gains are reduced, and then you can use this as a you know, design driver as well as a driver of argumentation towards the client. So
yeah, I mean, in a way, 3D modeling goes a layer deeper in studying what's the layout, the height, the opening, and so on with the simulations that cannot be done with modeling or sketching, actually. So there is a dimension to it that we should use the tool, but not to be used by the tool or to fall into the trap of using the tool. And I think we discussed earlier that we do not really like how projects are rendered these days with happy people. It is too much over commercialized, shiny, whatever design, which could look at a glance for a layman appealing, but actually design wise, it's completely not worth it. Yes, very much so. I mean, we used to be in the office with our staff, but since March 2020, we've been working by Zoom with them. So luckily we have some really good people who know how to work with us, and we don't have to be physically next to them telling them what to do. They can come up with their own initiative, and it's fine to do it by Zoom. And that's also why we could be in Singapore, because of these people, and because when we're doing Zoom from Bandung or from Singapore, it's actually the same. It's Zoom anyway. So that has been very different, and yeah, we wish to be with them again. Actually, our office and our staff, it's a different interaction. But also, client meetings have been reduced, and that is such a traveling for work has been reduced. That's been a huge time saving.
I mean, yeah. So yes, I mean, Zoom is really, I like it a lot because it also focuses you a little bit more, and it changes the way you present. Because what usually happened when we were working in the office, you know, we had these team meetings, and somehow, oh yeah, I opened the 3D file here and whatever, and it sort of was always a little bit messy, right? And now, I mean, we didn't meet our staff, like Daliana said, for a year, even though we were 10 minutes away from the office. We were just sitting in a different building. But it forced the people to, you know, put everything together in a PowerPoint and then sending the 3D file. So then we had the possibility to look at it, look through the PowerPoint and look through the 3D file, and then we could make up our mind, and then we could have a very short discussion about the actual project, because it's not like then hampered by, oh yeah, by the way, I forgot to show you this and this and this and this. So you can really do really precise and sharp. And so I think in a way, I hope I'm not wrong, that our team communication improved. So I'm meeting now my team actually more often, but shorter, because I have all the data with me and I had a look beforehand. So I'm not seeing it the first time when they're showing it to me on the screen, because I had the possibility to study it myself before. And so I really appreciate that very much. And yeah, I mean, for Daliana, I mean, of course, our roles in the office are a little bit different, because yeah, obviously Daliana is Indonesian, right? So there's a lot of business contacts. And before the pandemic, she was like every week, like what, 2-3 times she went to Jakarta. And this is like sometimes a ride of 5 hours one way, right? To just have a half an hour meeting. So this was not accepted in or not even thought of, that, you know, people, it was just expected that you spend this time and meet a client for 30 minutes, or even sometimes like for completely banal things where you came back and thought like, why did I go there now? You know, this was completely useless. But you spend 10 hours in total a day and you're totally stressed out. And actually this is, that this can be done and solved via Zoom. And yeah, we don't need to go back in that respect to uselessly travel and polluting the environment, unless you ride with the train, but you know what I mean. You know, this is personal energy as well as fossil energy, maybe spent in the wrong direction.
My worst meeting was from Rotterdam to Jakarta, back and forth, just for a 1 hour meeting. And that was like, wow, I did that. That was like unthinkable right now. And but so we had our office separated into those still coming to the office and those working from home. And we have until actually this week a girl who's still working from home, but she missed human interaction as well at the office, so she's coming back to join the office, and so we'll be fully offline except for us being in Singapore. For those in Bandung, it's been quite some time, the pandemic.
Yeah, I want to go back to Indonesia as soon as possible. I miss it.